Today I'm here at the Jackson Hole Summit. It's the last day of the event, and I'm here with Marc Miles, who is an economist in Massachusetts, and he gave an enticing and extremely common sense talk yesterday about the Federal Reserve and interest rates. And I think it's important to have him tell regular people exactly what's going on and why it actually hurts us as opposed to helping us. So if you will.
Well, just a little background, here we are. The recession was over 6 years ago. The quantitative easing everybody talks about started 6.5 years ago. The economy has grown, but the traditional forecaster looks at the economy and says, oh my gosh, labor hasn't grown as much, the economy hasn't grown as much, wages seem very sluggish, how can this be? And economists really haven't come up with a plausible answer. Well, I have a plausible answer for this. And the answer turns out to be that everything the Federal Reserve is doing right now actually is making the situation in many ways worse, not better. And here's a simple analogy that can help explain that. If a rocket scientist would try to forecast how far and how fast a rocket would go, simply calculating the thrust of the rocket, not considering the wind or the gravity or the friction pushing against the rocket, well, that scientist is going to be very surprised that the rocket didn't go as far or as fast as he thought. Well, sounds a lot like the current economy, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Which labor hasn't grown as fast, the economy hasn't grown as fast as people thought. How can that be? Well, what the scientist is missing is all the other forces pushing against the thrust. And you can think of quantitative easing as the thrust of the current policy. But the Federal Reserve, and indeed economists, aren't looking at the other effects that are pushing against this thrust. And one of those is the fact that prices change when the Federal Reserve conducts its policy. The Federal Reserve has forced interest rates down to all-time lows. That has implications, because now it's cheaper to buy capital than it was before. And all of you know that, because if you've gone out and bought a car in recent years, you've got 2% financing, 0% financing, and your monthly car payments are lower, and the cost of the car over the life of those payments is lower because the interest rate is low. And the same is true for business people. They can acquire capital at a much lower price. But the lower interest rates don't reduce the cost of hiring workers. And the end result is that the price of capital relative to the price of workers has gone down. And just like if the price of apples relative to the price of oranges goes down, you're going to buy more apples and fewer oranges. When the relative price of capital goes down, you're going to buy more capital and less workers.
Right.
And so when the production of a company increases, the company isn't using as many workers in the production mix as before. And guess what? Labor force doesn't grow as fast. They don't hire as many people as they would have if interest rates were where they were before. So you have this, what economists would call a substitution effect. You're substituting capital to do the work of labor. It's working against the workers. And because not as many workers are being hired and the demand for workers is not as great, that means wages aren't going to rise as fast. And because you're using more capital and wages aren't rising as fast, the capital is now getting a bigger return or a bigger part of the additional production than workers would be getting. And so you find one of the problems that everyone's talking about, a widening divide between the incomes of wealthy owners of capital and the average worker. So this low interest rate policy means not as many middle-class workers are being hired as they would at higher interest rates. And the compensation to the middle-class worker isn't growing as fast as if interest rates were higher. So you hear in the press, in the media, the talking heads saying, well, will the Federal Reserve raise rates, not raise rates? Should they raise rates or shouldn't they raise rates? Here's the answer. Higher rates are not the enemy, they're actually the friend. Because with higher rates, more workers would be hired. And I've looked at this empirically. And I've looked at going back to 1960, over 50 years. What is the relationship between when interest rates are increased and what happens to employment in that year, the following year, and the year after? And guess what I found? The only consistent relationship over the 50 years is that if interest rates go up this year, employment goes up this year. And I do the same thing for the income gap. Does the amount of income that goes to capital, to workers, go, or the relative amount, workers versus capital, go up or down when interest rates go up? Are workers hurt or are they helped by higher interest rates? And again, going back to the 1960s, the only consistent relationship is that when interest rates rise this year, the wage gap, surprise, shrinks in the following year. So if the Federal Reserve's really interested in a faster growth of workers, and shrinking the income gap, and having wages grow at a faster rate, then there should be no question of what they're going to do. Interest rates should be higher.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
It's interesting that protesters at the federal summit are demanding interest rates be kept extremely low, or 0%.
It's sad that they're doing that.
And this is why I wanted to talk with you, because people need to be educated about the truth.
Well, unfortunately, economists need to be educated about the truth. They're missing something obvious in front of their nose. Now, I'm a PhD economist. I've gone through, all the rigorous education. Nobody ever talked about this. All they ever talked about was you increase the money supply, you get faster growth in the economy. They didn't realize, well, yes, but you change relative prices, and the way they do things is going to change.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Miles. Very much appreciate your help and your extremely interesting and simple descriptions of this important information. Thank you.